Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar. My name is Charlotte and I will be monitoring the chat and helping if you have any technical issues throughout. Today we'll be focusing on FME 2023 best practice tips and tricks. Your host for today will be Mary Lester and I will hand over to her shortly. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. You have all been placed on mute, however we welcome your comments and questions by typing these into the question panel. We will address these at the end of today's webinar in the Q&A session. If we don't get a chance to answer your question, don't worry, we will follow up with you afterwards. Finally, today's webinar is being recorded and we will share the link with you after the webinar via email. Okay, over to you, Mary.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning for our webinar. My name, as Charlotte said, is Mary Lester. I'm one of the FME consultants here at One Spatial. And today we're going to be looking at best practices. So I'm sharing with you some tips and tricks for using FME that I've picked up over the years. So to start, just a very brief introduction to One Spatial. We work with spatial data and we provide software and solutions that help our customers manage their data. We have a number of offices across the globe with our headquarters here in the UK in Cambridge. We work with customers primarily within the government, utilities and transport sectors. We have a number of technology partners that we work very closely with. In particular, we're a platinum partner with Safe Software, the producers of FME. And we've been reselling and working with FME for really quite a long time. And so I'm sure you're all aware by now, but it's been all change in the FME world recently. We've got lots of new names and logos for the products. So just to recap on these and reiterate it, FME Form is the desktop product. FME Flow is the server product, so enterprise level data processing. And FME Flow Hosted is the enterprise product hosted on the cloud. It's all very confusing. I'll apologize now if at any point I call things by the old names. Yeah, it's a little difficult to retrain your brain after 13 years. But thankfully, the application names themselves are unchanged. So we've still got FME Workbench, where we build our workflows, the data inspector, the licensing manager, and actually there's a new application, the transformer designer, new for FME 2023, where you can build front ends for your custom transformers and packages. Really exciting stuff. And I expect we will see some future webinars and articles on that popping up very soon. Yes, my first tip of the day, how to remember the new names. Okay, so FME Form, that's where we form our ideas, form our workflows. FME Flow, that's FME at the enterprise level, so where those workflows run, as many as you can get flowing, and the data just flows. That's the idea. And FME Flow Hosted is exactly that. So it's FME Flow hosted on the cloud. And as part of the whole rebrand, the Safe website has been transformed. It's a completely new look, looks amazing, but if you're used to the old website, it's certainly a bit trickier to find things. So I just want to give you some pointers on where to find things that you may be familiar with. So www.safe.com, that's Safe Software's homepage. So if you're new to FME, that's a really good place to start. If you are looking for all the product resources, then it's fme.safe.com. That's where you want to be looking. Click on the menu button, and that's where all the links have been hiding. So links to the downloads, documentation, tutorials, webinars, all the technical knowledge resources, they're hiding in there. So that's a really good one to bookmark. Of course, we've got community.safe.com. That's pretty much unchanged. If you're not familiar with it, it's a fantastic resource where you can access FME expertise from the user community across the globe. And probably, my favorite page, the formats page, here's where it lives now. I'd suggest bookmarking it also. It's a fantastic resource showing which formats are supported in FME. Okay, so the licensing means that there's no longer editions. It's just now one product, FME Form. But this page should still be your first port of call when you start a project or encounter a new format. Just, to check what's supported or not for each format. Okay, so let's talk about best practice. I spent quite a bit of time trying to think how best to structure this webinar. Do I dive into detail on a couple of topics or try to hit all the bases? I've only got, 20 minutes, right? So I've decided in the end, I'm going to go quite high level and broad, but give you links to references and things where you can explore it further for anything I touch on that kind of piques your interest. So to try and give it some structure, I'm thinking of FME as a toolbox, a set of tools that help you manage your data. You can use it to connect to data resources, analyze your data, you can integrate with existing workflows. So I've tried to group my tips and tricks in this way, but really, there's a lot of overlap. Many of them apply to the different sections, but this is how I've tried to do it. So here goes. First tip, choose your format wisely. So be aware that for some data formats, there are multiple readers and writers. For example, Esri geodatabase files. The Open API reader will read and write your geodatabases without any requirements around Esri software. Brilliant. But if you want to read or write data with any of the bells and whistles, so things like domains, subtypes, or use where clauses, then you need to use the Esri official GDB format. And that's going to need Esri installed and licensed to be able to access the libraries. Similarly, AutoCAD. Drawing files, there are two readers, an official one and an open one. The open one has, of course, much less functionality. And it's the short name in the formats gallery that uniquely identifies a format. So always use the short name term to avoid confusion. Another tip, don't overlook the XML and the text file reader also. Really versatile. And actually, if you have some data in some unstructured format, you can often read it in with the text reader, just to get it into your workflow, and then use your transformers to chop it up and move it along. And actually, you can save that logic then as a custom format. So use it, reuse it, share it with your colleagues, all great stuff. An old one, but a good one. One of the first things I remember learning when I started using FME was always, always, always check the parameters button. It's where you configure your data. What you get, of course, varies for every format. So for example, for CAD drawings, you can set whether you're forming your feature types from CAD layers, or whether there's any entity data that should be attached, and so on. For CSV files, here are the options. And setting the feature type formation is key to how your data appears on the canvas, what you get to work with. So here it can be named by file name or named by format. Now, it might not seem a big deal, but actually this becomes really important when you want to read multiple files through a single feature type, or you want to use things like dynamic schema in your workflows. But that's a whole other webinar in itself, to be honest. But my point here being always check the parameters. And I've put some links here. Definitely look at dynamic schema. It's change things for you. So this may be obvious, but you'd be surprised the number of times we see workspaces where the entire data set is read in, and then almost immediately a large chunk of it gets filtered out. But connecting to the data and reading it, that's the expensive bit. you're storing all that data in memory. It's just going to slow everything down. So if you can do your data selection up front, read in only the data you need, that's going to be hugely more performant. So you've got options on the reader parameters usually, depending on the format. Here I'm reading in some data from a PostGIS database. I can set a where clause. I can set a search envelope, both of which will limit the data I read. And of course, ensuring I've got indexes on those fields in the database, that's going to make a huge difference. And that's the thing really, use the database or the native tools for your format if you can. That's going to be the most efficient and give you the most flexibility. So use SQL. Use the SQL creator, the SQL executor, and run SQL against the database. Return the results into your FME workflow for you to manage. And if you've got, lots of data, big data sitting in a database, Oracle, SQL Server, whatever, my top tip, make friends with your DBA. Get them to write you some SQL to do your data selection, your table joins, use views, whatever, and just run it in your FME workflow. Let the database do the work. Oh, and one last point on this. Altering what attributes are exposed in your feature type does not remove the data. It just removes it from view on your canvas. So it makes it easier for you to work with. There's less clutter on the screen, but it does not make it any faster. Yes, reader order. So within the navigator window, you can drag and move the order of your readers, and that sets the order in which the data is read into your workspace. So generally speaking, you want to read the smallest data first. So it's read, it moves through your workflow and releases and frees up resources. Now this is especially important if you're using blocking transformers. The classic example being the clipper. If you send the clipper features to the transformer first, and one way of doing this is to read that data set first, then you can use this setting, clippers arrive first. And then it's hugely more performant. Similarly, you can set the order you write your data in the navigator window. So here, if you're writing to a database with dependencies, so you've got foreign keys, etc., you want to write the parent first and then the children. So we've got some parameters to play with, and it's a case of balancing these really. Bulk write size or chunk size sets how many features are sent over the network at a time to the database. So here, 200 features are getting cached in memory until it's then transmitted as a chunk to the database. And features per transaction is normally a multiple of this. And once all the chunks in a transaction are received by the database, then the transaction is committed, which takes some time, of course. And it's at that point that the data will exist in the database. So these two parameters have a significant impact on performance, and it's really a balancing act. You can set the transaction size to 1, so commit every record. It's safe, but it's very expensive. Notice also these are writer level parameters, not feature type level. So in the scenario where you have dependencies, to ensure all your parent features are written and committed first before the children, you need to place them in separate writers for the same database and then control the writer order. That's it, job done. Another tip, do as much as you can within the database. Manage your tables within the database, create your table structure, drop indexes, create your spatial metadata, all with SQL in the database, outside of FME if you want. Then import your table definition into FME and just pour the data in with FME. Then rebuild your indexes and all that stuff after, and this is much speedier. You can use options like the SQL to run before and the SQL to run after to do this also. And this is the added benefit, I guess, of keeping everything at least stored within your FME workspace. Final thing I wanted to mention around writing is setting FME DB operation. And that enables insert, update, or delete at the feature level. It's really powerful. I've not got time today, we've covered it in other webinars, but I just wanted to mention it today as newly for 2023, Upsert is now supported for the Postgres database. So if you're working in the PostGIS world, definitely take a look at that. And I've got some links for you there. So all the previous tips on reading and writing still apply here, but instead use a transformer. The feature reader, feature writer transformers help you connect your data. This gives you complete control over if and when you read or write your data. You can connect it in series or in parallel within your workflow, write your data, and then continue with your workflow. It's really been a game changer, since it was introduced. I think back around 2017, 2018, really versatile. And something we often use in combination with the feature reader is the creator transformer. So it can act like a trigger, to initiate a feature, kickstarting a workflow, basically. And this is a really common scenario. So we could have several of these in our workflow, right? Right-click, and from the context menu, you can set their runtime order, which one fires first. And that's how you control your data read using the feature readers. I think I've mentioned this one already. Use SQL. Use the native tools that are optimized for your database environment. Let the database do the work. Some tips around that. It helps to define your SQL delimiter at the start of the script, like this. Use whatever delimiter value suits you. You just need to declare it. And if you're writing data with the SQL executor, remember to commit. You could use a second SQL executor, string them together. One does the inserts, the next does the commit, perhaps. Whatever way you want to do it, just remember to include the commit statement. Yes, we've talked about connecting to databases, but some of those data sets live in the cloud. So use the new breed of connector transformers. There's over 170 of them in FME 23. And you can see that, they're variations of different services. Importantly, they are packages. See the slightly different logo identifier on the transformer? But this means they're streamed from the FME hub. They're versioned. They can be updated really easily. So if the service details change, and they do, I expect, we've all encountered that with APIs, well, an update can be made and pushed out very quickly. And that helps you keep your workflows working. You don't need to upgrade FME. You just need to update the package. And if you're working in the cloud, I'd really recommend watching an excellent webinar by the guys at SAFE last month. I've got the link to it here for you. They did some benchmarking, if your data is in the cloud, if your FME is in the cloud, if they're in the same region in the cloud, different regions, using different techniques, and so on. And the main takeaways were, keep your FME and your data close. If your data is in the cloud, then put your FME in the cloud too, as close as you can together. Network latency was a major factor in the processing time. And use the native tools and let the database do the work. So they found the most efficient method by far was to export from the database using its native tools to a compressed CSV. Then use FME to download that from the S3 bucket and read the compressed text file. it was quite surprising. So they recommend not using the format readers and writers in this scenario on the cloud, but thinking outside the box, using what you've got. It was really interesting. And if you're working in the cloud, I'd really urge you to take a look at that one. Okay, so running out of time, and some of this is repeating the same thoughts or tips, let's say, from connecting to the data. So I've got them here on slides for you. You can read through and explore the ideas further, but I'm not going to actually take you through them here today. Something I do want to cover today is configuring your toolbox, so some tips on setting up your FME environment. If you've not done it already, make sure to configure FME temp in your environment variables. This sets the location for your temporary space for FME. By default, it's likely going to be some directory buried somewhere inside your Windows profile with very little space allocated. So choose a folder, C temp or C FME temp, whatever suits, somewhere where there's plenty of space. And then configure your environment variable to that location. And then just make sure you clear out that directory frequently. Shift and delete. Or use the purge temporary files from the tools menu within FME. It'll do the same thing. And disable feature caching. It's a great feature. We love it for development, but it kills your performance. So for production runs, remember to turn it off. If you're getting log messages like this, resource manager optimizing memory usage, first check that you've turned off feature caching and purge your temporary files. 9 times out of 10, that's the culprit. Okay, quickly, let's talk about moving our workflows, moving our projects around, changing environments, etc. So rather than fixed UNC paths, it can be really useful to use relative paths. And the FME parameter FME_MF_dir references the directory where the current workspace file resides. So if you ensure that everything else you use is in subfolders of this directory, then you can quite easily lift and shift your project. You could also use nested parameters. So define a root folder, for example, and then set all other folders to be subfolders of root. That works quite well. If you are working with FME Flow and your workspace uses data in the shared resources repository on the server. But now let's say you need to use that workspace locally, run it locally in FME Form, maybe to investigate an issue in your workspace. You can simply set the FME server parameter FME_shared_resource data to your local directory and run that workspace locally. Makes it really simple. New for 2023, something to look into if you're working with multiple environments, deployment parameters. They simplify the management of connections between multiple environments. So things like database connections, web connections, any text-based values like usernames, like API keys, file paths, things that may change between environments, development, test, pre-prod, prod, whatever. You will need FME Flow to be able to take advantage of this, but it's going to make things so much easier for you. So take a look at the links here and watch out for some webinars on this, I think. Last one, I think, looking at customizing your log file names. So generally, we need to run a workspace repeatedly, but the log file will get overwritten each time. If you don't want that to happen, you want to keep an audit trail of logs, then you can use a Python scripted parameter to just add a timestamp to your log file name. The details are in the links here. It's a really, really useful. Oh, I almost forgot. Most important tip of the day, annotate your workflow. Write everything down on the canvas, even the obvious bits. Because believe me, when you come back to it, in 6 months' time or next year, you won't remember your reasoning. So organize your workflow with bookmarks, annotate everything, and keep it all stored in the FME workspace file. that's it from me for today. I hope you found it interesting, useful. Even if you can take one thing away, hopefully it's been worth the 20-25 minutes or so that we've spent this morning. So thank you for your time. If you want to get in touch, contact us on fme@onespatial.com or support@onespatial.com. Check out our events and webinars page and book onto our next webinars. We've got one on the 12th of October on conditional parameters, 16th of November on custom transformers. So both quite exciting topics. And just a reminder as well that our Smarter Data, Smarter World conference is coming up on the 2nd of November in London. Registration's open and we'd look forward to seeing people in person then, hopefully. So that's it. Any questions?
Thanks for that, Mary. That was great. I'm not sure if you mentioned, but Smarter Data is a free event if anyone wants to attend. I couldn't mention if you said free, but just to plug that again. You've had a couple of questions come through. The first one is, you suggested that writing data to a database was slower with an FME writer than with SQL. Why is this?
Okay, so yeah, it may be the case, depending on a lot of factors, the data, your environment, your particular scenario. But if I maybe give you a scenario, let's say you're writing data to a database table and there are indexes on that, attribute and spatial indexes on that table. The default behavior with FME is going to be that it inserts the data features and updates or maintains those indexes immediately after. So that means for every transaction, after every commit, the indexes are being rebuilt. And that's really expensive, very slow. So the suggestion is to explore using SQL to manage it better. So drop the indexes using SQL. Insert the data into the table using FME and then rebuild the indexes afterwards once all the data is in place. And for large amounts of data, that's generally going to be quicker, more performant than the original method. Hopefully that answered it.
Thanks for that. Okay, you have another question, which is,
okay.
You mentioned Upsert is new for FME 2023. What is this?
Okay, yeah, so Upsert, it's not an FME thing, it's a database thing. So it's a database operation that's really a combination of update and insert. So that means like an existing record will get updated if the identifier exists already, and the record will be inserted if the identifier doesn't already exist. So I think Upsert was actually, made available in FME 2022, but it's newly supported for the Postgres writer in FME 2023. So I guess anyone that's writing to databases should take a look, but in particular, if you're working with Postgres and PostGIS. And if it's a bit confusing, the other thing to note is that the change detector transformer actually identifies features as upserts for you. So that can be something to look at also to help.
Brilliant, thank you. That's all the questions you've got for today. So if anyone else has got any, you can drop them in or they can email us.
Yeah, sounds good.
Brilliant, thank you everyone, and thank you for your time. And we'll see you all at the next webinar.